Great. Codemasters Racing Series, and the perfect example of a developer that released a good game and then tried to make it a series with mediocre sequels. To understand where today's reviewed game, Grid Legends, comes from, it is important to understand its legacy and the previous work done by its developers, Codemasters. Originally, the series was called Toka and heavily focused on touring cars. The studio produced some really good quality games, praised for their authenticity and sense of immersion that they gave. Following the release of the excellent Toka Race Driver 3, Codemasters started working on a sequel that would branch out of the previous work and move into a more fantasist world in which the player would own their own team and compete in all kinds of motorsports with their own vehicle. This was Race Driver Grid, and it was once again a success, as the title felt fresh and the overall idea, combined with the system of in-game seasons, a schedule event, and the finale at Le Mans, felt compelling, somewhat believable, and provided players with a huge replayability factor. I remember having played until season 23 with my own team. That is how hooked I was. Greed was such a success for Codemasters that making a sequel was not an easy task, but it came 5 years later in the form of Grid 2, and the least we can say was that the wait was not worth it, mostly because Codemasters made some choices that, in my opinion, did not pay off. First, the cockpit view was gone, which already killed a lot of immersion for players who think that it is important. Next, the compelling season-based career mode was also gone and replaced with some kind of mock-up of YouTube and Facebook progress that was more cringy than anything else. A year later came Grid Autosport, which focused more on multiplayer and did not even bother bringing a solo campaign, something that fans of the Toka series enjoyed. It resulted in a boring experience and a lack of attractivity. I mean, why would players play Grid when games like Forza or Gran Turismo could do the same and better? Unfortunately, the same mistake was repeated again with 2019's Grid, which also focused on multiplayer experience, leaving solo players with a bunch of menus to interact with and choose their races from. To make it short, it was not interesting and was one of the reasons I got a refund on Steam. But worse was the feeling that the quality of the series had significantly degraded over the past decade. While Race Driver Grid looked superb for its time and felt believable, 2019's Grid looked ugly and the cars felt more like flying carpets over a track than racing vehicles on wheels. Speaking of the graphics, they were actually so bad that during the review I made on my main channel, and the link is in the section down below, I even had to double check to see if I accidentally were in low settings, but no, I was in ultra. It was that bad. So 3 years later come a new entry in the series, Grid Legends, and this one really had a heavy burden on its shoulders because it carries the legacy of a dying franchise with a lot of disappointments coming from previous installments, and the developers know it, which is why they brought us a couple of improvements and additions that we'll be talking about, and that in my opinion managed to make this game worthy of our interest, although I also think that it could have been much better. First, let's talk about the campaign, which in my opinion is the main point of this game. I think it's great to have stories in racing games, and I thought it was awesome to have actual actors portray the game's protagonists. As much as I admire the work done by animators in the gaming industry to try to recreate humanity in game characters, their work will never replace the actual aura that a real human being can have, provided that the actor is good. And luckily, the cast is indeed good. In the game, Marcus Sado feels like a real, involved, and passionate team manager. Yuki Tanaka does feel like she is that determined veteran female pilot who is finally going to achieve her goal to become champion. Valentin Manzi seems like a charismatic and friendly fellow whom you'd like to have as a friend and not as your enemy, while Nathan McCain is the perfect pompous bastard you love to take down in the game. And not only do these actors spice the campaign up, but when you see these pilots again in the solo mode, they allow you to remember your times in the story mode, and you get emotionally invested as you progress further. It is really well done. As far as the progress goes, though, I would say that Road to Glory, which is the name of the campaign, is your typical zero to hero story. There's nothing groundbreaking in there, which is maybe the problem. It took me about 7 hours to finish it in Legend difficulty, which is the second most difficult level, and I think that it would have taken even less time in a lower difficulty level. I found it therefore a little bit too short, and so were cutscenes, in my opinion, which could have used more dialogue, more details, and more intrigue. It really felt like Codemasters were trying to cut as much costs as possible in there, and the problem is that it is not the only only aspect of the game that makes it feel cheap. I think that another way, a clear way that Codemasters tried to cut corners was with vehicles. And sure, just like the previous games, the cockpit view is back, and that is great. But they also try to modelize the cockpits for each car. That is also great. The problem is that there aren't many cars compared to other racing titles. We're lacking names like Mercedes-Benz, Lamborghini, Peugeot, and even though some brands are present, they only feature a bunch of models that feel random at best. For example, why is there only a classic prototype McLaren? Why do we only have the classic Alpine A110 while the current amazing modern version is missing? It either feels here that Codemasters have tried to cut costs, or worse, they are reserving those for upcoming DLCs that they are going to monetize. And let's not forget that they've been bought by Electronic Arts after all, and I would not be surprised if we would be subjected to EA's favorite dick move in the upcoming weeks or months. Speaking of corner coatings and cars, there is also quite a sizable amount of cars that are not even licensed cars, like the trucks, the NASCAR-alike cars, or the open-wheel cars. And not only are these not real cars, which would have been okay if they had been done with the same standards of quality as the licensed ones, but the problem is that they have not. I mean, look at this. The lights have not even been modelized, they are just textures, and it is really noticeable, and that is very shameful. A vehicle like this reminds me of vehicles we found in the cheap German simulator games from 10 years ago that everyone was laughing about. And I also think that the developers missed the mark with some parts of the game, menus especially when it comes to how you manage your team. And sure, there's a garage menu where you can upgrade because some of the bonuses you can benefit from, but let's say you want to set a livery or upgrade your car, you can only do so by selecting a car before a race, and it just doesn't make any sense. And it took me a while to figure out. I just wish that the garage menu was more inclusive, so we wouldn't have to look everywhere to do everything you'd expect to do there. Also, I absolutely despise the name Driver 22 in the campaign. I don't understand why Codemasters did not even try to record several lines with several different types of names. So good job, Jack Smith. Good job, Michelle Bradley, for example, right? With maybe a couple of male names and a couple of female names. The reason why they said that they've called Driver 22 in the campaign is because they wanted to feel more inclusive, so it didn't have to be a male or female character. Why not record different lines with different names? It would have taken a little bit of extra time, and the result would have been so much better. This is how cheap Grid Legends feels. It feels like if they had spent a little bit, not even a lot, just a little bit of extra money, it would have made the game experience so much better, but they have not, and it feels very frustrating instead. So these would be the grieves that I have against Grid Legends. They are pretty bad for sure, but fortunately, they do not outweigh the positives that I'm going to mention from now on. And I'll start with the AI, which is very easy to beat in lower levels, but proves to be very challenging and unpredictable at higher levels, which is wonderful because it really appears as if the AI gets closer to the level of actual players. That, combined with the fact that the AI regularly makes believable errors, and we have a solo experience that can provide players with a similar experience to what they would find online, and that it in itself adds a lot of extra value gameplay. I also think that the game is an improvement compared to the previous one. For example, apart from some in-house car model, it looks better, the environments are more detailed, and the game relies less on lens flares to blind us from any flaws left by the art team, unlike the previous game. Although they still have some lens flares though. But I think that generally, graphically speaking, the game shines the most under harsh weather conditions. The heavy rain pouring on cars really feels very intense, and when racing in snowy conditions, we can really feel the chill of the air surrounding the car and the ice cracking under the pressure of our tires. These are again believable experiences that are compelling and make us want to come for more. I also think that one of the strengths of this game are the driving sensations. I have a feeling that I'm finally playing a sequel of Race Driver Grid. You can adjust difficulty level from the arcade level, which the game helps you with everything, to a sim mode in which the slightest error can send you off the track. The way the cars handle feel believable, and playing with my Logitech G923 True Force has been a blast and a genuine help compared to playing with just mouse and keyboard. I've also been surprised by some of the new game modes for this game, including the multi-class races, which at first I thought would be very cringy, but are in fact quite fun, as they give a fair advantage to weaker vehicles, and your job driving a faster vehicle is to close in on them from the handicap you're giving at the start of the race, and it turns out to be very interesting and very, very entertaining, especially as you are catching them up and finally take them over at the end of the races. In the end, I believe that Grid Legends is the best entry of the series since the original one back in 2008. It manages to bring some of the best aspects of the original game while cherry-picking some of the finest elements I did in the later entries. It is just a shame that it does not go far enough and that some of the corner cuttings made by the developers are too obvious at times. It still deserves a 7 out of 10, as it is a good piece of entertainment that will keep you distracted from current world events, and that in itself is perhaps the most important. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of Grid Legends. Have you tried it? How would you rank it? Do you still play it, or have you moved on? I want to know everything. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to Eric, all the DJ Don, and Dr. Forbin. It's been the Eradicator. I'll see you guys later. A huge shout out to everyone who's been helping me out on Patreon and via the YouTube Joint membership program. Creating content on YouTube involves continuous circles of ups and downs, and it is when we are the lower parts of the curve that your help really motivates me to keep on going. Your contribution really does make a difference, which is why in return I try to give back by offering backers access to my private Discord channel, automatic access to exclusive giveaways, or answering your questions during the show. You can help me out with as little as $1 a month, and any help is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for watching again. This is the Eradicator. I'll see you guys later.